Hello and welcome to the Sana Psychological Podcast, your safe space for connection, healing, and growth. Each episode, our experienced clinicians and special guests will share strategies, stories, and resources to support your unique path to well-being. Because at Sana, your mental health matters. Welcome to another episode of the Sana Psychological Podcast. I'm Paige Abbott. Today, we are talking about trauma and traumatic experiences with Sabrina Markandu. Sabrina Markandu is a registered psychologist who works with teens and adults around a variety of mental health concerns. She's particularly interested in trauma and its impact on how individuals understand themselves and relate to the people around them. Sabrina draws from many theories and therapeutic modalities to help clients, including trauma-informed practice, EMDR, internal family systems therapy, and client-centered approaches. Welcome, Sabrina. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Paige.
So we are going to talk today about the idea of trauma. And I guess where I wanted to start with this topic is when we use the word trauma, which, as a side note, I think is being very heavily used in our society right now. I'd love to hear more from you about what do we as therapists and as clinical providers actually mean when we're using that word trauma, and how would you say that's different from everyday stress and experience?
Yeah, I look at it from, I think, like a nervous system point of view. So I don't know, I kind of consider that stress is something, something unexpected. We typically don't have control over when like a stressor comes up. Sometimes we can anticipate it a little bit. Like I think about starting a new job or I don't know, starting even like school for the first time. We can anticipate that maybe there will be some stress that comes with it. The difference, though, between stress and trauma is that our nervous system, usually we're able to respond to the stressor. There's kind of like a natural sort of ebb and flow to, building up some adrenaline. We learn to adapt, and then our nervous system is able to settle once a stressor kind of passes. But with trauma, I sort of see it as that the nervous system doesn't fully return back to that kind of like equilibrium that most humans like to be in, where we feel, maybe a little bit more like safer, we feel more stable, we can put more like words to our experiences, think clearly. And so with trauma, that doesn't fully happen. There might be triggers that still appear where our body sends us back into this kind of survival mode. And then over a longer period of time, eventually our body starts to get really exhausted. And so people will find, different symptoms coming up with trauma as opposed to stress. I hope that makes sense.
That's
it can be a little bit convoluted.
Yeah, that does make sense. And I guess as I'm listening to you talk, I'm thinking about the most stressful experience you've had in your life and imagining that how you felt in that moment almost continues outside of that moment, and maybe not quite to the same extent. Like obviously our experience will still naturally shift when we're outside of those moments of experience. But if I'm hearing you correctly, our body, our nervous system, our mind, our emotion may still be carrying a lot of that energy from that experience through into the rest of our lives. And I can only imagine, like you're saying, how draining that would be and how destructive that would be and disruptive to our day-to-day experience, because again, we're using all of this energy and resources that really were supposed to be contained to that event or that situation that has ended, but it hasn't ended for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I also find as well that sometimes if a trauma is occurring many, many times, or if there are multiple experiences of trauma that happen in a short period of time, I have found, especially because humans, I think, work so hard to make meaning out of what is happening in our lives. Why is it happening? We want to understand it, but sometimes, some situations, we don't have as much control over it as we would like. And I have found, certainly working
Yeah.
with many different clients who've experienced traumas, that sometimes we start to distort our kind of perception of ourselves. And a lot of times I find that like self blame ends up coming up. And
Mm.
now, when another stressor or another trauma presents itself in life, as it always kind of does, sometimes our ability to sort of see our way clearly through it, again, it gets a little bit distorted. And that's why I think it's so important coming to therapy to have, at least someone in your corner that might be able to give you at least another perspective about what's kind of going on.
Nice. I love that. And something I wanted to check in with you because I've heard the discussion that not all events that some people code in their minds and their nervous system as traumatic will
Mhm.
be experienced as traumatic by everybody. So I've
Mm.
heard that phrase, trauma is in the eye of the beholder. And I was just curious for
Yeah.
you to touch on that topic because is it possible two people may experience a similar event, but one person may be experiencing it differently after the fact than the other?
Yes, for sure. I definitely agree with that sentiment. Definitely. I've kind of noticed that, I don't know, I'd like to really take into account what people believe about themselves, what messages also they've heard in society, maybe in their families, within their communities about what they've been through. Like if, you've learned that over time, let's say like starting a new job is traumatic. You will lose sleep. You will lose your sense of identity. Certain messages like that we can internalize, and now again, our nervous system will try to anticipate some of these stressors. But if we are not given or provided almost like the adequate tools to be able to see ourselves through a stressor or a traumatic event, um, yeah, again, we end up putting that back on ourselves and we feel like, okay, so there's something wrong with me. Now maybe I can't handle, what people go through, or I can't handle this situation. And it can be really honestly depressing. Um, People start kind of getting confused about what is it that I can do? Am I as capable as I thought I was? And it can be really isolating, I find as well. So
I could
if
see that.
two
Yeah.
people, yeah, have different kind of characteristics, different kind of coping strategies as well, sometimes you're able to see yourself through the storm, and sometimes it takes a little bit more help, is sort of
Yeah.
how I see it.
So it's not really fair. A lot of events people will just label as, well, that was traumatic. And I
Hmm.
think that's not really fair representation because, again, some people might have experienced that event as a trauma, but other people wouldn't. And
Hmm.
for those who are experiencing an event that is actually being experienced as a trauma, what would you say are some of the more common symptoms that
Hmm.
people don't always realize are trauma related?
Yeah, yeah. One kind of activity that I like to use with folks is the window of tolerance, to talk
Mm,
about
mhm.
um, kind of increasing our awareness of what symptoms we might be experiencing that could be trauma related. And so, with the window of tolerance, we look at sort of this middle optimal zone where I always say, like, we feel really capable when we're in this zone. So, we can think and feel simultaneously, kind of like what I mentioned before. We feel safe, we feel secure, we even feel curious about why an emotion might be coming up. And so I usually say that, like, we certainly experience positive emotions in that optimal zone, but we can also experience negative emotions or things that might be considered more negative or harder to handle, like sadness or anger. But if we have a curiosity for it, usually we can integrate those emotions, those thoughts, those body sensations, so that we could understand, okay, how do I as an individual, um, make meaning about this experience? How do I, again, see myself through this and cope with it? But on the flip side, what happens when we experience trauma is that that optimal zone, all of that space starts to get really small. And so
Mm.
people notice that there are, symptoms of like anxiety, anger, flashbacks and nightmares can start to become really common. Even like difficulty focusing or concentrating. Yeah, which then of course leads to memory issues. So people start to find it's hard to remember maybe like simple details, but that's because our body, our nervous system feels like we're in survival mode. When we're in survival mode, our body is just thinking, I need to keep my heart beating, I need to continue taking in air, and I need to fight, flight, freeze, fawn. There's a few different
Mhm.
survival responses that we go through. And so our brain is not really considering, okay, I need to remember every single detail. I need to, digest or, use my reproductive system in this moment of survival. And so people
Mhm.
will find then sometimes there's like a lack of energy that comes up. Um, yeah, sometimes people find even like the difficulty to speak. Everything just sort of feels really numb or dissociated. And then, of course, how that impacts our relationships is also something I like to look at. So, yeah, do you feel isolated or do you feel maybe more of that people pleasing coming up, almost like an over functioning where the pendulum sort of swings from, okay, I can't get out of bed, I feel really unmotivated, to then suddenly just like buzzing with energy, but not really taking a moment to slow down, see how I'm doing. Can I check in with what's happening inside of me? It's overwhelming. Overhaul is sort of how I see it.
Absolutely. I was thinking when you were talking as well, how you were describing some of those experiences, it seems to me that being present would also be really
Mhm,
challenging because the
mhm,
body, the mind is doing so much work in the background to process, to function, to just go through the basics of experience that might be rooted to some of those memory challenges that it would be hard to just be in a moment and take
mhm.
in what's going on around you when there's actually so much going on inside of you, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I also tell folks as well that like oftentimes after experiencing trauma, our past starts to become super intrusive into the present moment. And so oftentimes there's a lot of like hypervigilance. I'm constantly scanning my environment to see, is that trauma going to happen again? Am I under threat? That hypervigilance, for the most part, we all as human beings, we kind of have a bit of like our spidey sense. But if all of our focus is on, am I in danger right now? Again, over time, it's really exhausting. Not just like mentally, but physically as well. Our body is ready to fight, flight, or freeze when it's possible that that threat isn't to our survival in that moment. It might be upsetting, but yeah, it might not be a life or death situation. And so, again, our nervous system gets really sensitive and we'll start viewing sort of any threat to our nervous system, any threat to our body, even our emotions or mind, as this is a life or death situation. And that's
Mhm.
sort of that result of that sort of optimal zone shrinking really small. I usually tell people that, like, yeah, maybe a year ago, before this trauma occurred, when I would drive, someone cuts me off while I'm driving, I kind of roll my eyes, keep going. But now, today, maybe my nervous system is really sensitive. My optimal zone is so much smaller. And so now when someone cuts me off, I'm like flipping them off, I'm swearing, I'm really angry. And that shows that, okay, I don't have as much capacity to tolerate some of these more overwhelming or intense emotions. That's why I think therapy, self care, coping strategies all help to increase a little bit of that optimal zone.
Nice. What would you say to those who are listening, who are wondering how much their past experiences are impacting them today? What would be a message you would want to send out to them?
Ooh, I think I certainly, even as you say that, Paige, I have so much just compassion. I think to recognize that, hey, something isn't fitting right in my life. I feel overwhelmed, or I just don't feel as fulfilled. I think to recognize that, I would say, first and foremost, that you're not alone. You don't have to go through this alone or to sort through all of those feelings and thoughts and body sensations and understand them, first of all, right away. I often say that like therapy and healing is not linear. So there can be ups and downs. It doesn't have to always be progress all the time. And again, I think trauma puts us in a space where we just have to constantly go, go, go. It feels like we have to always reach sort of the next step. But can we also take a moment to breathe, to be in that present moment, to practice what that might be like? And if you don't feel like you can do that on your own, ask someone for help, either a friend, someone close to you. And of course, therapists are
Nice.
also available.
Yeah. What do you wish more people understood about trauma responses?
Ooh, I think, I believe so. Trauma responses, I think they are like adaptations. They're not like a character flaw or evidence that something is wrong with us. I see it as something as it is evidence that we are adapting or trying to adapt to our environment. And I think too that oftentimes these kinds of adaptations, maybe they would have helped us getting through that trauma, but maybe today we're not in that same sort of traumatic environment, but we continue to use these adaptations or responses. And I think that's why therapy can be a really great place to talk about, hey, do these responses still serve you? Do you want to keep, thinking about things like this? Do you want to keep using a certain coping strategy? I usually tell people that, like, sure, we can put coping strategies into healthy or unhealthy. I kind of view it as coping strategies. Some are really good in the short term, others might be better in the long term. And so, yeah, I kind of wish that people understood that, yeah, you're not a bad person for coping after trauma in a certain way. It doesn't mean that this will be your forever, that there is still an ability to adapt again if you want to, if it fits well with me. And so, yeah, I think kind of looking at our nervous system with compassion can sometimes help with that of, okay, wow, shout out to that nervous system, shout out to these different parts that showed up and helped me get through this awful time in my life. And okay, do I still need these parts? Can I adapt them so that it fits more, I don't know, easily into the life that I have right now? Yeah. Mhm. Exactly.
Oh, I love that language. So, as we come to the end of our episode, I've really appreciated what you've said, Sabrina. And I do feel like trauma is quite a well discussed topic right now in social media, articles related to mental health and well being. However, I do think sometimes there's a theme of some misunderstanding. And I appreciate you clarifying today more so what trauma really is and how it's based in a person's experience of something, their reaction to something and the consequences it can have on their sense of self, their well being at many levels. You commented on physical well being, cognitive well being, emotional well being, and then quality of life that comes out of that. So I think there's a lot that can be learned from that. And I appreciate the clarification that not everybody is going around, experiencing trauma in hopefully their day to day life. But when we do, we'll really feel it and know it in our experience. Any
Mhm. Yeah.
last thoughts or comments you wanted to share on this topic of identifying and getting to know trauma that we haven't discussed today, but you feel would be important for the listeners to know?
Yeah, I think one thought, as you were kind of giving that summary, one thought that came up for me was the importance of choice in healing. And so I, again, find that trauma oftentimes it is something that is out of our control. Nobody chooses to be traumatized or experience something that's traumatizing. And so I think when I work with clients in session, a big part is of the healing, I think, is letting the client define what happened to them, however they want to. And so I've had clients, they might call an experience, yeah, that was the trauma that I went through. Other people I've heard call it the incident or the experience, or even the
Mm,
relationship. Whatever sort of word or label fits for the client, I think that's part of taking back the power that we've lost after experiencing the trauma. Again, trauma takes away like our ability to control, anticipate, and have power over our lives. And so in healing, I try to focus on that in session with clients of how do you want to call this? And what does that mean for you? And like you said, Paige, how you experience healing.
I love that. And for those of you who are listening out there, if you're starting to wonder about your own experience with trauma and you're curious to learn more, on our Sana Psychological website, we have a bunch of free resources. And we do have a trauma section where we have therapist recommended resources. We have some free curated guides and questionnaires and things that we've created as well to help you along your journey, whether you're just beginning or this is something you've been looking at for a long time. And as Sabrina had said earlier, if this is something you're experiencing or wondering about for yourself, sometimes it can start with a gentle conversation with a safe and supportive person in your life, a friend, a family member. You can also take it to a safe and trusted healthcare provider, or start looking for a crisis line or a community therapist in your area who can start to guide you through what's going on and give you some place to share, some tools, some insight, and some general support. Because that message of hope and change, I hope, resonated loudly in this episode, that Sabrina certainly sees a lot of hope and a lot of potential for change and healing for those who've experienced trauma. So, as you said earlier, it doesn't have to define you, and it's certainly something that can shift with conscientious healing. Yeah, thank you
Yeah.
so much for joining me today. And I look forward to a future conversation we're going to have, more so focusing on the treatment of trauma, which I'm really excited for. So stay tuned.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Sana Psychological Podcast. We're glad you joined us today. For more resources, free tools, or to book a session with our team, visit sanapsychological.com. Your mental health is our priority. Until next time, be gentle with yourself and take good care.